Alright guys, so I finally got my spotter to start. You guys know that it has been a minute that I've been working on this thing. Now, everybody has the same issue. It cranks over, or I don't know where, it won't start, or it has a long cranking before it even starts, and everybody, the dealership tells you, oh, it's a fuel pump, and supposedly a month later they replace the fuel pump, and 2 weeks later you're back to square one again. So the issue is not the fuel pump. Okay, so I'm not saying that you won't have that issue, but my car has 60,000 miles, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are having this issue even before then. So I don't think it's a fuel pump. And you go low on fuel and it burns up the fuel. I think that's a lot of BS. But here's the thing. Here's your fuel line. Okay, this one supplies to the high pump. The high pump goes into the injector, so the fuel rail. Okay, so if you have a gauge, okay, you unplug this, you connect your gauge, you test for PSI, or even if you don't have a gauge but you open and cycle the ignition, that's gonna spread out fuel like crazy. That's your fuel pump. Okay, as long as that spreads out pretty decent amount of fuel evenly throughout, not like really weak, but good pressure, your fuel pump is good. Then that goes over. Let me see if I can take this off so you guys can see a little bit better. So then that goes over to your high pressure fuel pump, which is down here. Okay, that's a mechanical fuel pump, and that's supposed to throw out crazy amount of PSI, anywhere from 2,500 above, to keep the car running. Okay, now I have done a lot of this stuff. I tested my injectors, I tested my throttle body was bad, by the way. So your throttle body could be bad, but there's one way to check that out. You unhook this hose, okay, and you look at the flapper inside. You open the ignition, you have somebody over here, you press on the accelerator, that flapper should move. If it moves, your throttle body is good, okay? So you can take that out of the way. I know a lot of people say that, oh, they freeze up and this and that. So just give that a shot. If that's the case, you have a bad throttle body. But it's supposed to move when you have the ignition up and running. Okay? So back to the fuel system. The problem is not the fuel pump. The problem is not a high pressure fuel pump. The problem is not a crank sensor, because if not, you will have a crank sensor. And by the way, I did not get a code for the issue that I'm going to show you guys. There was no code for it. There's no code for fuel pump. There's no code for anything like that. And I said, with the scanner, I tested the fuel pump. I turned it on manually, a lot of pressure, blah, blah, blah. The problem is, on the fuel rail, there's a sensor. That's a fuel rail pressure sensor. If that fuel rail pressure sensor doesn't read above I think 1,000 PSI to start, it's not going to start. So I had this issue with many other cars. Didn't think that a new car like this will have the same issue, but it blows my mind. But here is the part number. Okay, that's the part number, and it is this sensor here, which we are going to be replacing. Now, unfortunately, there's not a way for you to unplug it from the top for you to do the test. So the test is to remove the intake manifold. Okay, you remove it, you lift it out of the way. It's not that complicated. You have this hose here, back here, you unclick it. I mean, obviously it's a little bit complicated because I already have all this stuff taken apart. So if you have to do it, you have to get all the stuff out before you even do it. So but anyways, but I'm at the, once you get to this point, you have to unplug all your map sensors and whatnot. You unplug those. You take this guy out. This pipe has 2 bolts, one there, and there's another one right here. Okay. This is the plug for your injectors. These 2 plugs right here. You can see these 2 plugs. This plate, you got to take it off, and then you can get to the manifold itself, and it has multiple holes, bolts, snugging it down. Once you take it out, underneath there on this side, straight down, that's where you're gonna have your fuel rail pressure sensor. Now, I can show you guys in the scanner how to duplicate the problem and whatnot. Give me 1 second. Alright, so you guys can see, this is how it sounds like when you're trying to start it. Okay? Otra vez. And it started just fine, right? It took a little while. Ya apágalo. So that's the scenario that you guys are getting. Crank, 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 no start. Crank, 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 no start. Crank, crank, no start. Eventually this one will start because I already unhooked the sensor. So the computer now shows like 5,000 PSI on the fuel. So then everything mechanically is supposed to work after that. So we're gonna go ahead and replace that sensor, and that should give us a good start, no problem. So again, we're gonna take this pipe off. We're gonna disconnect the throttle body. We're gonna take this pipe, just unbolt it. You don't need to take it off. You don't have to do anything. We're gonna disconnect here. This one has like a little clip right there. We're gonna unhook that. The cable's in the back. Unbolt it, and we should be able to move this thing out of the way. Okay? All right. Let me show you guys that process. I'll be right back. Alright guys, so we took it out already, and it has been maybe 5 minutes after you get all the other plastics out. But this is the intake manifold. This is basically a straightforward, very straight throttle body, valve sensor, this chamber. Okay, so we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 bolts on the manifold itself. Alright, so once you get in here, this is your fuel rail, and right here is the sensor. As you can see, I already had it unhooked, and that was the only way to test out if the sensor was bad. Apart from the computer, it was not giving me enough pressure. Every time I crank, it would not give more than 400, 381 or something PSI. So not enough for the computer to actually turn on the injectors to actually fire. It doesn't mean that I wasn't getting the correct PSI. I was getting the correct PSI, but this sensor was not reading the right PSI. So the way to test it is you take all this thing apart, you take it out, you unhook the sensor, you put everything back on, you go for a crank, and that's when you can start having the long cranks like that I just showed you guys. It's gonna crank, it's gonna take a minute for it, but as soon as you unhook this sensor, on the scanner on the computer, it's going to jump from 400 psi to 5,000 psi. Now that's more than enough that the car needs to be cranking, but still the sensor, the signal, everything is off, so it cranks a little longer, but it still cranks. So now we're going to change this sensor, which is right here. We're going to change this sensor, and that should bring us back to regular cranking, regular startup. So let me get that sensor swapped, and that's probably like a 27 ratchet or something like that. Let's take this guy out, put a new one in, and start putting it back together. Alright guys, so this is a new sensor. I already showed you guys the part number, and this is a 1516 to be able to get it out. I just got a new one, 1516, and we're going to be able to crack that open and put the new one in. Alright, be right back. Alright guys, so we put that sensor back on, we put everything back on. I erased the codes on the check engine. See? It starts no problem. Now I do have a weak battery. My alternator is bad, but right? Starts right up, but that's just a weak battery, so oh, that battery quit. That battery quit on me. Ya no, porque la batería está muerta. Yeah, so that battery quit on me. But, so yeah, as you can see, it starts right up. So if you guys have that problem, with the car cranking over, not starting, long cranks, not starting, check the fuel. If it has fuel, then go straight to the sensor, because that's the one that gives you no start. Before I had that sensor on, the long cranking, and then it will start because I disconnected the sensor and I tried it and it started. But before that, it will start with the sensor on, it will start, but at a split second it will die. It will barely turn over in a sense of starting. She will crank, but in a sense of starting, she will barely start, and then it will die right away. It will start, will die right away. So the fuel rod pressure sensor, that's your problem. Without it, she will not start. It will just crank, or crank and start and die. Alright? So I hope this helps you guys. Like always, share, like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Peace.